Welcome to Doc Martin's Case Files, where each episode I'll be looking at a fictionalised case, but one based on the sort of patients that I've seen over the last 26 years as a GP, and I hope will be really helpful to you. And when I finish the case, we'll finish with something that has grabbed my attention that's completely different that I've noticed in the last week or two that I want to share as an end point. So today's case is insomnia. Difficulty sleeping, and it relates to Theo, who's 26, and he asked for an appointment because he's struggling to sleep. Now, the first thing I like about this is that Theo has made an appointment just to talk about sleep, and sometimes I think people are a bit embarrassed to do that. I wonder if they think maybe it's not a thing for a GP, or they only tag it on at the end, sort of hoping that, I'm struggling to sleep, doctor, could you just give me something for it? Thinking that it's quite a simple thing to just give a sleeping pill. And I understand that, but actually sleep is a big subject and I don't want to tag it on the end. I'd like a whole appointment to really do it properly. So I'm really pleased that Theo's booked this appointment and come to see me about his sleep. Then the question is, well, what's he come for? Because very commonly, I think people do go and see their GP because they would like to talk about a sleeping pill. It's completely understandable. Not sleeping well is a real challenge. It can make life miserable. And if there's a pill that could just sort it all out, that would be great. But also, I think sometimes people do come to the GP because they think, well, GPs prescribe stuff. And so why else would I talk to a GP about sleep other than wanting a pill for it? But as we'll see, prescribing a pill is one of the last things I want to do. There's a place for it, but it's rarely the solution. So there's always that slight tension when someone comes about sleep of, are they wanting a pill, are they not? How am I going to sort of navigate that as a GP without just prescribing sleeping pills that are addictive and cause problems in an unsafe way? But the first thing is to listen to Theo and find out what's going on for him. How long has he had this problem? Has he always struggled with sleep? So let's just find out a bit about him. Theo, he's 26 and he's living at home with his parents. He did leave home, he went to university for a few years and then he had to come back, as many young people do, because he couldn't afford to live independently. He's not unhappy with his parents. Things are okay at home. But he's out of work. He did graphic design at university and has struggled to get work in that field. He worked in retail for a bit, but over the last 9 months, he's not been working at all. He's been trying to apply for jobs. And so the first question is, has he become depressed? What's going on for him with this? And Theo he's definitely fed up with it. He's lost his mojo a bit. He's a little bit at sea with where he's going with his life, but I wouldn't say he's depressed, which is often the case with people who can't sleep. It can be a feature of depression, but it often isn't. But he's particularly fed up about not being able to sleep, and that's definitely making things worse. He's never been a brilliant sleeper, but he's never had trouble with sleep like this, and it's getting worse and worse. I've checked that he's not suicidal. There's no sort of great risk factors here. And another big question is he self-medicating to help himself sleep? So using alcohol or occasionally drugs, but usually it's alcohol as a way of getting off to sleep. And he's not doing that. So I'm reassured from a safety point of view. And then the next question, which is probably the most important question I'll ask anyone about sleep, I always try to learn this early, is what's actually happening in the night? So, and I might have to go through this bit by bit. So what time does he go to bed? What happens then? So when he's turned the light out, does he fall asleep at that time? Or does he toss and turn for a long time? What happens next? I'll often use that as a GP and say, and what happens next? And what happens next? Until I've really understood what a night is like for Theo. And what time does he get up? So Theo will usually go up into his bedroom when everyone else in the family goes to bed, about sort of 10, half 10. But he doesn't try and sleep then, he's just not sleepy. So he'll often be on his phone. He might do a bit of gaming for a little bit. He might be on his phone. He might listen to music or listen to a podcast. And ultimately tends to fall asleep about 3 in the morning. And then he actually stays asleep. I'll sometimes ask people what happens next because, do you then wake up in the middle of the night and you toss and turn? He actually sleeps okay then. He doesn't, once he's finally got off to sleep, he can then sleep quite well. He might wake for a little bit, but he usually goes back to sleep. And then the next crucial question is, well, what time do you get up? And he gets up about midday. That's generally when he wakes up. He might wake up and snooze, but the time when he finally wakes up for the day is around about midday, sometimes 11, but sometimes 1. So now I've got a pattern and a little picture of Theo's sleep, and that's so important because I could find myself talking about sleep hygiene and say, well, what you've got to do is reduce your screen time before you go to bed at 3 o'clock, that'll sort it out. Or have you tried a warm bath? Or what about a cup of cocoa? Maybe read a book. And while all those things have a place, they're not going to work for Theo because the fundamental problem he's got with getting off to sleep is he's just not sleepy at that time. So it's not that he's not sleepy because he's so stimulated by his screen. Not for Theo. It's he just hasn't been awake long enough in order to go to sleep when the rest of the family's going to sleep. Because he's got into this habit of sleeping the wrong hours. He's actually getting the right amount of sleep, just in the wrong part of the day. Because he's sleeping between about 3 and midday. He's getting about 9 hours sleep, which it's pretty good going. Younger people often do sleep more than 8 hours. And yes, that sleep's a little bit broken, but actually he's getting the right amount of sleep. It's just in the wrong place. And this is a really common thing that happens when you lose structure, because for 9 months, Theo hasn't had to get up and go to work. And so his need to get up early has gone away. And as a result of that, he's drifted into this pattern of waking up later and later. So the thing I need to talk to Theo about is not sleep hygiene and how to prepare for sleep, but something called sleep pressure. So sleep pressure is really important and fascinating as a part of sleep. And this is something that builds through the day that then prepares us and makes us sleepy. And it's really important it does this. If we never experience sleep pressure, then we might just do all-nighters all the time, never go to sleep and do our body a huge amount of harm. But also, it's the reason why we can't easily fall asleep earlier in the day because we haven't built up that sleep pressure. If you woke up at 8 o'clock and then you try to have a snooze at 11 in the morning, it's just not going to happen. Yes, you might find you can have a little afternoon doze if you're very tired, but you're not going to stay asleep for hours, even if you do go to sleep in the afternoon. So sleep pressure is affected by numerous things, but one of the most important things is the number of hours we've been awake for. So as a rule, you want to be awake for about 16 hours to build up enough sleep pressure to get sleepy to be able to drop off to sleep. So when Theo wakes up at 12 and goes, if he were to try to go to bed at midnight and go to sleep at midnight, he's way short of those 16 hours. And that's why finally by about 3 in the morning, he's getting to 15 hours. Eventually there becomes enough sleep pressure that he can go off to sleep. So one of the important things is being awake for enough hours. Another big factor in sleep pressure is early morning light, and this is all to do with chemicals like melatonin and how they change with our internal clock and our 24-hour variation of hormones. And so these hormonal changes happen with sleep pressure of being awake for 16 hours. That's the mechanism our body uses to make us sleepy. But also early morning light really helps set this off. And this is why if you put people in a dark room, they've done this with experiments where people are deprived of light, their body clock just goes all out the window. We're still very dependent on the world that we live in, and that body clock, it doesn't only affect the animals and the butterflies and the wildlife around us, it affects us. So early morning light is a really important way to start building sleep pressure. So by sleeping in, not only is Theo not awake for long enough before he tries to go to sleep, but also he's missing that early morning light. and that's making it harder for him to build up that sleep pressure. So it doesn't mean you have to be outdoors. Being outdoors is one of the best ways of getting early morning light, of course, but throwing open the curtains, letting the light in early, or having internal lights that are bright is really important for building up that sleep pressure. There are other factors involved in sleep pressure, like getting exercise, particularly early in the day. Exercise just before bed can actually be counterproductive, but getting exercise, getting active, being physically and mentally active through the day, all these things make us sleepy and make us tired. And we know that, if you go for a swim, you're usually pretty tired afterwards. If you've been, mentally working hard on something, you're more likely to be tired. Whereas sometimes if you have a day off and you've nothing to do, you kind of feel fatigued, but not tired in a healthy way. So coming back to Theo, the big problem for him is that he's lost his routine and then his sleep has just slipped around. And the question is, how does he fix that? Well, you could say, well, why not use a sleeping tablet when everyone else goes to bed? That if you took that at 10, half 10, 11, would that then make you sleepy enough? And it might do. It's having to overcome a lot of sleep pressure or lack of sleep pressure and lack of preparation for sleep. So it's a very artificial way of just trying to drug yourself up despite not preparing the body for sleep. So it's certainly not my first preference. And also, if that got him off to sleep, but then he got up at 12 the next day, that's not going to solve the problem. So the really big question is, how does he move his clock? Well, he can't just go to bed earlier because he's not sleepy. So ultimately, he needs to wake up earlier. And this is hard sometimes because you're so tired, you don't necessarily want to do that. A question I'll sometimes put to someone like Theo would be, okay, which hours would you like to sleep? Because it's not the same for everyone. Some people want to go to bed early and get up early. Some people are, more night owls. And so Theo says, well, he'd like to be able to go to sleep by midnight. Well, then the answer is he needs to be getting up, ideally by 8, certainly by 9. He might then say, well, I don't think I could do that. I think I could probably set my alarm for 11, which is okay. But then if he sets his alarm for 11, he's probably, the earliest he's likely to fall asleep is about 2. And this is quite a challenging conversation because ultimately it's not really what you want to hear when you're struggling with sleep, that the answer is to reduce the amount of time you're in the bed to start with and just wake up earlier. You're thinking, but I'm so tired. That doesn't appeal, and I get that. On the other hand, this is the biggest part of the answer for Theo, is bringing his morning forward. Now, there's a couple of ways he could do that. He could do it gradually. He could set his alarm instead of 12 for, maybe he doesn't set an alarm at all at the moment. He could set his alarm for 11. And then he could set his alarm for half 10 and then 10 and gradually bring it back. And that will be fine. He does need to respond to his alarm though, because if you set your alarm for 11 and then you hit the snooze button over the next hour, it's not going to work. Or if you set your alarm for 11 but you're so deeply asleep that you just sleep through it, then that's not going to work. So he might need to think, okay, what's my backup plan here? Do I need an alarm that's the other side of the room so I have to get out of bed? Will I hear that alarm? Do I need to give my parents permission, and this is a challenging one, to actually wake me up? And will I promise then not to be completely grumpy that they've woken me up if that's the plan? So he could do it gradually, or he could do it in one go. He could say, okay, I will start from tomorrow getting up at 8 o'clock. If he got a new job and he was starting on Monday, he'd probably have to do that. Many of us, many times we will have a very short night where we're really tired. He might have only gone to sleep at 3 and he's now going to get up at 8. That's only 5 hours sleep. He's going to be exhausted. He's not going to be wanting to do that. And he probably won't be ready to go to sleep at midnight the next night. He might be, but it might be 2 or 3 nights of poor sleep and limited sleep before his body starts to reset. But what I can promise is that over time, he really will be able to reset. And then we've also got the question of, well, what's he going to do if he gets up at 8 o'clock? And this comes back to the fact that he's out of work and the purpose of work, because work has many purposes. It has a purpose to earn money, of course, but the most important thing, the 2 other things it does is it gives us structure and it gives us purpose. Now, the purpose obviously depends on what the job is and how fulfilling we find it, and he'd get more purpose if he could get back into graphic design. But even if he just had some job, that might be a route into what he really wants to be doing. And anything that is a paid job has a degree of purpose to it. So obviously the ideal would be that he can get back into work, and we could talk about job clubs and how to get support with that. And maybe he's become so flat about it and fed up with it, he might want to look into talking therapy to think, well, how to explore some of these issues about, what he thinks about his life and where he's going. Because, like I say, we've established he's not depressed, but he's certainly a bit fed up with all of this. But the other thing that work gives us is structure. It gives us a reason to get up in the morning. And if you've got to get up at 6:30 to go to work, it doesn't take much motivation actually to get out of bed when the alarm goes off, because you've got no choice. You know that it's not an option to just press the snooze button and keep sleeping in, because someone's going to phone you from work and say, where are you? And actually that makes life a lot easier. There are times in my life where I've thought, it'd be really good for me to get up early and have an extra hour before I go to work to have time for quiet contemplation or to get some jobs done. And I can manage that for a day or 2, but I really struggle to keep going with it, because actually I don't have to. And if the alarm goes off an hour earlier than need be, and I just think, I'm too tired, there's no consequences from just turning the alarm off and having an extra hour's sleep. And that's the challenge for Theo at the moment. There's no consequences if he sleeps in. So what sort of structure might he build in? What he really needs to do is build in artificial structure into his day. And that might be putting things in his diary and saying, right, these are things that have slipped that I'm not doing. I'm going to make them a diary commitment. And it might be a bit of exercise, going for a run or a cycle ride, or going to help his gran, or visit someone once a week, or some activity around the house, or something that he puts in his diary, not because his parents want him to do it, but because he knows it would be good for him. Maybe it's meeting up with friends, it doesn't have to be a job. But he needs to start building structure and putting that structure particularly into his working week, and start acting like someone who works. And, maybe a lie-in at a weekend, but be careful. There's one reason why many people sleep badly on a Sunday night if they work Monday to Friday. And partly it might be the Sunday scaries and being a bit daunted about going back to work the next morning. But the most common reason why people struggle to sleep on a Sunday night is because they had a lie-in on a Sunday morning. So they've been awake an hour or 2 less, they've got an hour or 2 less sleep pressure, and that makes all the difference, so they can't get off to sleep. So he's still got to be careful at weekends, but many of us would have a bit of a lie-in over a weekend. Now, if Theo can start getting those things right, then he could really make progress and wouldn't need a sleeping tablet. And just to think about some of the other structure problems people have with sleep, because not everyone has had their sleep slipped like this. The other reason why I always like to ask people, when do you go to bed? What happens then? When do you get up in the morning? Is another pattern I'll commonly see is people going to bed at, say, 9 o'clock because they're so exhausted and getting off to sleep, but then waking at midnight and then being awake for on and off over the next 3-4 hours, feeling like they're awake far more than they're asleep. And then finally dropping off again, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, and then sleeping until 9 o'clock. Now, fascinatingly, apparently, I was hearing the other day, it used to be before the last 150 years or so that people would often have a double night like that. So they would go to bed early. I guess it was dark. They didn't have lights other than candles, so they'd go to sleep. And then they'd wake up in the middle of the night and do some jobs. And then they'd go back to sleep again and have a second night. And you might like that pattern. But if you don't like that pattern, the tossing and turning in the middle of the night can be really frustrating. And people will sometimes say, oh, well, I know I should always go to bed at the same time. And that's a real myth. Getting up at the same time and getting up early enough so that you get sleep pressure, that's really important. Being consistent with your time of getting up is really helpful. But you want to go to sleep when you're sleepy. And be careful that you're not spending too many hours in the bed. So someone who's going to bed early, awake in the middle of the night, and then getting up maybe a bit later than ideal, what they need to do is try and reduce the hours in the bed, start going to bed a bit later, start waking up a little bit earlier, so that gradually that tossing and turning time in the middle of the night is reduced. And the other big thing that can really reinforce that is anxiety about sleep. And this would be another thing I'd want to explore with Theo. Do you get anxious about having a bad night? Because that's really common. And you can start dreading going to bed. And then the bed, which should be associated primarily with sleeping, has become associated with fear and dread and all these negative associations of lying there tossing and turning. So exploring that anxiety related to sleep can be really helpful, and recognizing that sleep anxiety becomes self-fulfilling. And one trick I'll sometimes do if I'm not sleeping well in the middle of the night is just remind myself that I'm still resting, and that even if I'm lying there not asleep, rest is still very good, and very good for my brain and for my body, and that actually, it's okay to be awake for a bit in the middle of the night. It's not ideal, it's not what I want, but it's not doing me any harm. And that's really important, because people may well be aware that of studies and newspaper headlines every so often that talk about sleep deprivation being bad for your health, which is absolutely true. So if you are deprived of sleep, which is very different to insomnia, and I'll come to that, if you're deprived of sleep, then that is associated with high blood pressure and risk of heart attack and stroke. It's not good for your cardiovascular health. But sleep deprivation is very different. Sleep deprivation is where someone is deprived of sleep, and this is only over a long period of time that these risks become an issue. But for instance, new parents usually have sleep deprivation because their baby just keeps them awake all night. When I used to do silly on-call shifts where you'd work for 56 hours and try and get sleep where you could, that was sleep deprivation. And people with sleep apnea have sleep deprivation. They think they've slept through the night, but actually their sleep apnea, where they snore so loudly that they have these pauses in their breathing, constantly rouses them, so that they actually are being deprived of the quality of sleep that they need. That sort of sleep deprivation is linked with cardiovascular health if it's sustained over many, many years. But it's very different to insomnia. The thing with sleep deprivation is you will be sleepy in the day. You'll find you drop off to sleep without any difficulty in the day. Whereas people with insomnia are often tired and lethargic and irritable and feel exhausted in the day, but they're not dropping off to sleep all the time. Not usually. And the good thing about insomnia is that it's not linked with risks to cardiovascular health. So if you're lying there sometimes caught in the trap of thinking, I'm so worried that I'm not sleeping and I'm so worried that this is bad for my health, well, I want to really reassure you, insomnia is not bad for your physical health. But it is frustrating, and you will function better if you don't have insomnia. There is so much that can be done for insomnia, and the answer is very rarely pills. The big problem there are two big problems with sleeping pills. The first is, even if you had a sugar pill that had no side effects and no problems, it wouldn't be teaching you how to get sleep right. It wouldn't be educating you. It wouldn't be helping you deal with sleep anxiety. So yes, it might be nice, and I guess if it had no side effects, we'd probably use them more. But the idea of relying on an external substance rather than learning about and understanding and really cracking insomnia is very much second best. The other issue is that most sleeping tablets, so these are tablets like Zopiclone, Zolpidem, Temazepam, Diazepam, are very addictive, and your body gets tolerant to them. So they work to start with, but then over time that dose doesn't work as well. You need a bigger dose to get the same effect. And if you try sleeping without them, your sleep is even worse because you're now getting sort of withdrawal symptoms from the drug. So you just are likely to end up hooked on them. And that's something we really need to protect people from, so they don't end up in that trap. And particularly if sleep is a long-term issue. Sleeping tablets, they can have a role for one particularly stressful moment, a very short course, occasionally a short course to try and reset your sleep. And by short, I mean like 2 or 3 nights. But if you start using them regularly, then it's a real problem. And ideally, if you are someone who's been on them regularly for a long time, maybe go and talk to your doctor and say, look, I'd really like to come off these. How do I do that? Probably the best treatment for sleep insomnia is something called ICBT, Insomnia CBT, and that's certainly available on the NHS in my area. There's a fantastic sleep clinic at my local hospital, the Royal Surrey. And one thing that I will definitely be doing for Theo is, with his, if he's happy for me to do this, send him a link to the resources on the Royal Surrey's insomnia page, and in particular a podcast by a fantastic sleep therapist called Louise Berger. And I'll put a link, the same link in the show note description at the bottom of this page, so that you can follow that link. And I'd really encourage you to listen to the podcast. It's about half an hour long, and it's very powerful, and she has a great way of getting things across. So those are all the things I'd want to do for Theo. I'd want to offer him follow-up to see how he's going, because he might be disappointed. He might have been hoping to just go away with a pill that was going to solve it all, and I've actually given him quite a challenge to change the pattern of his sleeping. But in the long run, this will be so much better for him. And it'd be good to catch up and see how he's doing, and see how he's doing with structure and with his mood in general, and maybe start finding a way forward. So, to finish, something that's grabbed my attention recently, something completely different that I've been thinking about. I do a lot of thinking about things. I'll listen to something and it'll just play in my mind, or I'll hear something and question it. And this is a really positive one that I learned recently, actually from listening to the What's Up podcast. That's the Van Telken's podcast. And it was an episode about a year ago about the power of saying no. Lots of good things in that episode, but one thing really stood out for me. And that is that sometimes if we're asked whether we can do something and we look in our diary and it's blank, and so yes, we could do it, it is perfectly okay to say that we have got a prior commitment, where that prior commitment is actually to ourselves. And this really spoke to me, because I'll often get asked to do things, and sometimes it will be something I don't really want to do at all, in which case I should just be bold enough to say, actually, that's not for me, ever. Thanks very much for asking. But sometimes it'll be the sort of thing I would like to do, but I look at my diary and yes, that time slot is available, but I feel a sense of dread, of sort of slight overwhelm, because that week is looking a bit too full. Or I'd planned to, do some jobs around the house, or just spend time with family that morning. It's not a firm commitment, but I was just looking forward to having a bit of space in my week. And I would feel guilty about saying, oh no, I can't make that, because I can make that. It's free in my diary. And yet what that says is I'm not prioritising my own well-being, my own space, in the way I would prioritise something in my diary that's been put there by someone else. So if there's a fixed commitment, oh no, I can't do it because I'm teaching that day, or I've already got a meeting, then that's easy. But I need to value my own space and my own time just as much, so that I can say, I'm afraid I've already got a commitment that day. And I'm absolutely not lying. My commitment is to myself, to have that space and that time. And I just found that so powerful. It's something I'm going to use from now on, I think. So that, yes, I still say yes to the things I want to say yes to, but that I don't feel guilty at saying no when I'm prioritising something that's actually a little more important to me, at least in that week. So I thought I'd leave you with that as something that has grabbed me. And each time I do one of these episodes, I'll come up, tell you something else that's been on my mind that I've been thinking about that relates to health that I hope you'll find helpful. So look out for more case studies. If you like this, then I'd love you to subscribe and like it, leave a comment. It will really encourage me to know whether this is a good thing to do, whether I should be doing more of these. So please let me know what you think, and let me know if there are other case studies that you would like me to do, and I'll do my best to cover them. Thanks for listening.